It was just another Saturday morning, the kind of morning when the world seems to run on autopilot. The sun shines through the window, the bread burns in the toaster, your son complains about swimming lessons, your wife asks if you paid the electricity bill. Everything is normal, everything is predictable. But on that day, he noticed something, a cruel detail. No one looked him in the eye for more than 2 seconds. Not even the woman with whom he had shared his bed for 20 years. Not even the boy who carried his surname. Not even himself, reflected in the dark screen of his cell phone. And it was there, between silent bites and other people's laughter, that he understood the worst kind of loneliness, the kind that happens inside your own home. He smiled, a mechanical, practiced, automatic smile, the kind that doesn't come from affection, but from the obligation to look good. Inside, however, a part of him imploded in silence, a part that no longer remembered the sound of his own voice, his wife's warm hands, the sparkle in his son's eyes when he talked about dinosaurs. It was as if he were alive out of protocol. He spent the rest of the day on autopilot, answering emails, cleaning the yard, watching a movie he hadn't seen. At night, when everyone was asleep, he went down to the kitchen and stood there in the dark. The light in the refrigerator flickered on and off slowly, as if the universe were breathing. In that brief pulse of electricity, he saw something he didn't want to see. He was there, but he wasn't. He existed, but he wasn't noticed. He breathed, but he wasn't felt. In the days that followed, he began to walk the streets as if searching for something. A gesture, a glance, a sign that he was still part of the world. No one noticed him. Not even he could find himself. He began to ask himself questions he had avoided for years. When did I become invisible? When did I stop being someone and become just a role played efficiently? What if everything I feel is just an echo inside an obedient body? That's when the hardest questions came. What if I'm just an illusion inside my own brain? What if everything I love is just a reflection of an evolutionary need to not go crazy alone? What if even the pain I feel is just a system trying to stay relevant before it shuts down? In this spiral, he found texts, videos, and conversations lost on the internet that talked about this vertigo that few admit to feeling, about the suspicion that everything is simulation, that there is no past, that love is an algorithm, that consciousness is just organized noise, and deep down, it all resonated as truth. He began to think that maybe he had already died, and only his routine continued to function, like a ghost who still knows how to wash the dishes, but has forgotten what it's like to be touched. One night, at the height of his insomnia, he wrote in a notebook, "Maybe I don't want to die, but living like this is like dying a little every day." That night, he didn't sleep, not because of insomnia, but because of a specific kind of restlessness, the kind that arises when the world around you seems to be working perfectly, while inside, everything is out of place. The kitchen light was still on, as if the room refused to accept complete abandonment. He stood there, motionless, his hands on the table and his eyes fixed on the empty cup, the same one he had used for years, with an almost imperceptible crack in the handle. That crack represented him. A few days ago, he had seen a video by chance on TikTok. It was called Existential Crisis ICEBERG. He laughed at it at first. He thought it was simplistic, but the video stayed with him, not because of the words, but because of the feelings. It was as if someone had drawn in layers what he had always felt, but never knew how to name. Layers of sinking, not of the world, but of himself. The first layer was easy to accept. Everyone has their own complex lives. Obvious. But when he heard the word Sonder, something stirred inside him. Realizing that every person who passes by on the street carries within them a story as dense as his own left him paralyzed, as if pain were no longer a privilege, as if his anguish were just another drop in the ocean of forgotten existences. And what to do with that? What to do with the fact that, in the history of others, he was just a poorly remembered extra? He looked at the bedroom door. He remembered his wife sleeping on her back, the dinners where the conversation was more about chores than feelings, the hugs that, even when given, didn't seem to touch him. He thought, does she feel this too? And if she does, why doesn't anyone say anything? He descended another layer, concerns about the future, his schedule, the mortgage, his son's report card, car maintenance, tasks that should be signs of stability but had become silent shackles. He thought, when did I stop living and just start functioning? Then came the most disturbing thought, and ridiculous at first glance. What if we're in a simulation? He vaguely remembered Descartes, the deceiving demon. But there, in the silence of that night, it wasn't philosophy. It was paranoia. It was fear. It was the realization that everything, his wife's touch, his son's cry, the taste of coffee, could be an illusion, a sequence of programmed stimuli. What was real? What if everything was fake? He kept digging. He arrived at the unanswerable question: why does anything exist? It might seem childish, but there, at midnight, it seemed like the only honest question. If nothingness was a possibility, why did anything exist? Why was he there? Why was pain so concrete if meaning was so abstract? And then, death. He knew he was going to die. He always had. But that night he felt death differently. Not as a distant end, but as an announcement that could come at any moment. He thought of the times he believed he was safe, behind the wheel, in surgery, when his son had a fever, and wondered how many times he had come close without knowing it. What would he leave behind? A body with a name, a work history and paid bills. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the moment when it would all end, but it was impossible. His brain refused. His consciousness denied it. It was as if, inside him, something was screaming, "I can't imagine my non-existence." And that impossibility terrified him, because if even death could not be understood, then what about life? He got up from the chair, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and looked himself in the eyes. He saw an exhausted man, not physically, exhausted from existing without knowing why. And there, in that reflection, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: sincerity. He was facing himself, not a father, not a husband, not a worker, but a frightened man. On his way back to the kitchen, he passed his son's backpack lying on the floor. He stopped. He knelt down. He opened it. He took out a notebook, pages scribbled with drawings, calculations, random phrases. One of them read, "The universe is big, but my room is bigger when I'm sad." He cried. He didn't know if it was for him, for his son, for life, for the lack of answers, but he cried. And for the first time in months, the tears weren't out of weakness. They were out of recognition. The question that consumed him now was more subtle, but more cruel. What if everything we feel for someone, love, care, friendship, is just a biological simulation? A refined form of self-preservation? It was as if compassion were a narcissistic reflex, an instinct wrapped in tenderness. When he helped a friend, was it really out of empathy, or just out of fear of one day being alone? He began to distrust his own gestures, like someone who doubts a mirror. If everything was evolutionary programming, to what extent was he free? It was in this state of existential hypervigilance that doubt evolved into mistrust of reality. A strange thought began to haunt him. What if all this started last Thursday? The concept seemed absurd, and it was, but it made sense in a dangerous way. The hypothesis that the entire universe, with all its memories, relationships, and stories, had emerged at once, out of nowhere, just a few days ago. With everything included, feelings, pain, hopes, all implanted. He was too skeptical to believe it, but too honest to ignore the possibility. After all, how could he prove that the past really existed? What if all his childhood memories were fabricated? What if the tears at his mother's funeral were just the successful execution of a sentimental code implanted at the moment of creation? This doubt led him to another point: religion. He remembered when he was a child and asked the pastor why God created such ancient fossils if the world was only 6,000 years old. The answer was always the same: to test us. But test what exactly? Our faith, our naivety, or our willingness to ignore the obvious? The Omphalos hypothesis of a God who creates the world already looking old seemed like a cruel provocation. A fake world, a test with no answer. A cosmic trap where the greatest sin was asking the right questions. He began to understand why so many people took refuge in ignorance. Doubt was corrosive. It didn't just destroy beliefs, it destroyed the ground beneath your feet. He began to walk around the city as if everything were a stage. The lights, the cars, the gestures, everything could be part of a pre-programmed script. And he was an actor without a script, improvising in front of an invisible audience. At times like these, he felt like a brain locked inside a skull. A lone commander in a dark cabin receiving sensory signals without ever touching the world directly. The images he saw, the sounds he heard, were just interpreted electrical impulses. The outside world was nothing more than a narrative constructed in the dark. What if one day the signal stopped? If his eyes closed and his nerves fell silent, only darkness would remain. The real kind, not the metaphorical kind. A loneliness deeper than any human abandonment. An absence that was not pain but non-existence. He thought about this as he took out the trash on a cold morning. The city was asleep. The sky was starless. And he saw his own reflection in a puddle of water. A man who seemed whole, but who carried cracks that no one could see. A man who questioned everything, but who desperately wanted something, anything, to be true. A man who, even without believing in miracles, still hoped that someone, one day, would say, "I feel that too." And there, before himself, he understood. The greatest despair was not doubt. It was the absence of company in it. It wasn't that the universe was silent. It was not having anyone to share the silence with. The next morning, he tried to ignore the bitter taste the night had left behind. He made coffee. He buttered his bread. He opened the windows. But everything seemed delayed, as if time had lost its rhythm. It wasn't just a delay in the hands of the clock. It was a delay in the soul, as if something inside him was waiting for a sign that never came. Time became a silent enemy. He had read about a theory called block time a few days earlier. The idea that the past, present, and future exist at the same time, like different parts of a single structure. It was as if time did not flow. It just was. That disturbed him. If the future already exists, if it is already written, then what is the point of choice? What's more, if the past still exists, then his mistakes also live on somewhere, not as memories, but as realities that never cease to be. He could no longer see his memories in the same way. They weren't sweet memories. They were prisons. They were living parts of him, breathing in another dimension, in a present that still pulsed. The mistake with his wife, the absence with his son, the giving up on himself. Nothing had passed. Nothing had been forgiven. That was when he learned the term superdeterminism, a scientific, almost clinical explanation for something he already suspected intuitively, that everything, even doubt, was already programmed, that freedom was a mirage, that the universe from the first atom had been traveling down a road with no forks. And there, faced with the supposed truth of total determinism, he felt no relief. He felt nauseous, because if everything is defined, including his anguish, then there is no redemption. There is no overcoming. There is only a script written in cosmic stone with every tear predicted, every silence calculated. Worse than that was reading a simple sentence buried in a forgotten internet article. Human life is a momentary universal anomaly. That was like a punch in the gut. An anomaly. A statistical noise. A crack in a universe that deep down doesn't care. And there he was, waking up early, paying bills, trying to love, trying to understand his son, trying to survive emotionally, while his very existence could be just a flash in a desert of darkness, a mistake, a fluke, a spark that illuminates nothing. He began to distance himself from people, not out of anger, but because he was ashamed of existing without meaning, as if the pain he carried was contagious. He didn't want to be seen anymore, but at the same time, he desperately wanted someone to see him. He entered a downward spiral. He tried to distract himself with videos and reading until he stumbled upon a concept that sent a chill down his spine: Boltzmann brains. The idea that, in an infinite universe, even brains with false memories and illusory perceptions would arise spontaneously, only to disappear seconds later. What if he was one of those? What if his entire life, his wife, his son, his childhood, his pain, his love, was just a mental trick of a brain floating in the void, doomed to disappear at any moment? That thought paralyzed him. He sat on the kitchen floor for hours, his back against the refrigerator, trying to breathe. He didn't want to die. But more than that, he didn't want to find out that he had never lived. In the early hours of the morning, he got up and went to the mirror. He stared at his face for several minutes. He tried to find some evidence that he was there, that he was real, that it hurt because it mattered. And he whispered, "If this is just a simulation, please let me believe for a little longer." That was all he asked for. A little time, a little space, a glance, something that said, "You are here, and this is not in vain." That morning he woke up with a strange idea in his head. What if the problem isn't dying, but being born before immortality? It seemed like a childish thought at first, almost selfish. But as the coffee warmed in his cup and the steam rose like a fleeing soul, he found himself diving deep into the hypothesis. If scientific advances really lead man to conquer death, then he, and everyone of his generation, lived in the last chapter of the mortal era, like someone who arrives 5 minutes before the revolution and dies without knowing it was coming. It wasn't fear of dying. It was the silent rage of being born at the wrong time, a grain of sand between two infinities, the before of consciousness and the after of oblivion. He thought of his grandchildren, of the possibility of them growing up in a world where aging is curable, where death is a choice, not a destiny. He thought that perhaps for them, the memory of mortals will be like the memory of caves, a primitive and improbable past. But then something inside him recoiled. What if this immortality was not a victory but a curse? What if living forever meant watching everyone leave, one by one, while he remained? What if living forever was just prolonging absence, stretching loneliness until it turned into despair? He looked up at the sky, the same sky he had seen on so many childhood afternoons, and felt that even if we escaped biological death, we would never escape entropy. The entire universe is moving toward silence. Stars die, galaxies dissolve, heat turns into absence, movement ceases. Perhaps it was better to live a short life, but with truth, than to exist eternally as a shadow. These thoughts accompanied him until a video appeared by chance, or by algorithm. It was about a rare condition observed in patients undergoing a surgery called callosotomy. The procedure cuts the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain, and what happens next is frightening. One hand acts on its own, trying to undo what the other does. A body divided between two wills that no longer communicate. He was fascinated and disturbed. If each hemisphere houses a part of consciousness, then maybe there are two selves inside us. What if one of them is silent? What if it's trapped, watching, feeling, wanting, but with no way to express itself? He began to wonder, what if I am only the visible side of myself? What if there is another me, silent, buried under layers of habits, fears, traumas? What if he tries to talk to me, in my trembling hands, in my unexplained nausea, in my sudden insomnia? The worst part wasn't the doubt. It was knowing that, even in the face of it, no one noticed. No one asked, "Are you okay?" But in the right tone, with the right look, with the pause that reveals it's serious. He felt like a stranger trying to escape his own body, trapped, divided, at war. That night, he dreamed that one of his hands was suffocating him. He woke up gasping for air, alone. The hand was there, motionless, but inside something was pulsing differently. A shadow of himself, perhaps. A side that wanted to live, but not like that. Not silent, not ignored, not fake. And then, for the first time in a long time, he wrote a sentence on a piece of paper and stuck it to the mirror. If there is another me inside me, may he forgive me for having shouted so little. In recent days, he had been avoiding the mirror, not out of vanity or denial of age, but for something deeper, an inexplicable fear of not recognizing himself. It started with a strange reading, one of those that appear at the end of a video or at the bottom of an article. Quantum immortality. At first, he thought it was ridiculous, just another philosophical fiction to distract tired minds. But the concept followed him like a persistent shadow. The idea was simple and devastating. If the interpretation of the many worlds of quantum mechanics is correct, then all possible paths come to fruition, even those in which you don't die. In other words, every time death knocks on your door, an accident, an illness, a mistake, your consciousness simply slips into the only branch of the multiverse where you survive. And this happens every time, without exception. From your perspective, death never comes. At first you thought, great, that's comforting. But then the vertigo set in. What if it's a curse? Because all the other yous, the ones who died, are left behind, forgotten, replaced. But this you, the one reading this right now, this one never dies. And it's not movie immortality. It's not eternal glory. It's cosmic loneliness. It's watching everyone leave, always. It's being the last echo of a forgotten song. He spent hours staring at this possibility. He didn't want to believe it, but part of him already lived like this, surviving everything but living nothing. He remembered the night he almost had an accident, a second's difference, an inch less. He should have died, but he didn't. Everyone said it was luck. Now he wondered, was it really luck? Or was it just another inevitable escape from death that would never catch up with him? If it was true, then he was trapped in an involuntary eternity, a perpetual survivor, a man condemned to continue even after everything. He went to his son's room, already asleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "If one day I seem absent, it's because I'm lost inside myself." The light from the lamp flickered, and for a moment, he wished it were all a lie, that death was real, that the end existed, because only those who believe in the end can give meaning to the present. The next morning, he wrote a note and left it on the table. "If I continue to live even when everything is gone, I promise to carry your memory to the last branch of the universe. But if I can choose, I want to leave with you, not as a hero, not as a miracle, just as a human being." If this story touched you, that silent feeling of being on the edge of an existential abyss, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, each text is more than words. It is a mirror for those who have ever felt invisible in their own bodies. If you want to help this message reach more people who also live in this silence, please consider supporting us with any amount. This strengthens our work and allows us to continue creating stories that do not shy away from pain, but embrace it.